Hi everybody, let's talk about your client memo and letter for this week. So what these are going to be doing is the client memo is for your records, and what it does is verify the information that you've researched for this particular client, and that way if anybody were to, in your firm, or if there were any questions as to the research you performed for this particular client, you could pull this memo out and you can basically show them the research that you conducted to answer this particular question. So what you will do is then base your client letter off of the client memo. So we do the client memo first. So as you'll see in Blackboard, this week's assignment is problem number 75 on page -235, and that's the problem we'll be using to produce this week's client memo and client letter. So Benjamin, a new staff accountant for local firm CPAs LLC, takes a CPA review course to help prepare for the CPA exam. Benjamin is not reimbursed for the cost of the course, $1,500, but his firm expects him to take and pass the exam. You're to use an available tax research service to determine if Benjamin may deduct the cost of the CPA exam course and write a memo communicating the results of your research. So in addition to that, for this course, you're going to write a letter in addition to the memo. So, the available tax research services are actually pretty limited as a student. If you were actually a CPA, your firm, or if you opened your own firm, you would subscribe to a tax research service. So for now, we're going to, especially for this problem, we're going to stick with irs.gov, the IRS website, and you'll use that for the research. But for these problems, we'll do the research together, so that you can get a good feel for conducting the research, and because I'm more interested in you applying the research to these memos and letters and getting good at writing them. So I want you to have an introduction into the research, but I don't expect you to become an expert at researching the question. So let's look at a model student answer for this particular client assignment. So this is actually another tax student's memo. So you'll see, well, this is the form I want you to follow for every memo that you prepare. So this will actually, if you want to set up a template, that would be great, and I want you to do this for every assignment for the week, for every week this term. So we'll start with the date, and this would be today's date, or whatever date it's actually due. So current date. And the preparer is income tax student. That would be great. The reviewer is myself, Professor Walker. So the subject I want you to make dependent on each individual problem. So for this one, it's would be something like reimbursement of CPA exam fee. And so then the facts I want you to take from the problem itself. So essentially you'll be just putting back the facts from the problem and restating them in the memo. So what this takes the place of is if you were actually interviewing a client in your office, you would restate the facts that the client has given you during that interview. But since you are obviously not interviewing a client in this particular situation, you are applying the facts as they were given to you, so you're just going to restate those facts as they were presented in the problem. So then your issue, that's going to be pretty self-explanatory. Again, you'll restate the question that's being asked in the problem. So the authorities is the next section we care about, and it just is going to depend on each problem what we're going to use. So again, the IRS website is going to be a great resource for this particular problem. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to take you to another slide later on, and I'll show you the authorities for this particular problem. And then you'll move on to the conclusion, and based on the authorities that you find that apply to the problem, what's the answer to the question? And so then analysis you're going to actually go through if there's a test, if there is explanation within the authorities that you find, you're going to actually apply that authority to the facts of the question and do that accordingly. So let's move on to this for your client memo. And then you're going to base your client letter off of your client memo. So of course start with the date, and you can make up an address or you can use some modification of the one that I've created here. I don't really care, I just want you to know that that's where the client's address would go. And go ahead and do the do an formal address, but you can use their first name. You want to make it personable but still professional. So we want to have an intro that again is personable but is not too personable. And so something like this one actually works really well. It was nice to see you in my office last week to catch up. We want something that, you know, we are trying to make the client comfortable with our letter, and not be too formal. But again, we don't, especially if you know this particular client on a personal level, you don't want to include that in your letter. You want to keep it nice and objective. So objectivity. Is a good thing. So then your next paragraph is going to outline what the client's question was. And again, you'll base it on this particular question. So, can Jack deduct that CPA exam expense? And then you'll restate the facts. So here you're restating the question. And this is where you're going to restate the facts of the case. So again, this almost becomes a form, and you'll want to do it this way every single time you write a letter. So you'll have your intro paragraph, then you'll restate the question, then you'll restate the facts, and then the next paragraph, this is your analysis from your memo. Now, it doesn't have to be as detailed as your memo, because frankly, your client is probably a layperson and you don't want to bog them down in details. Let's put it that way. And so what you're going to do is, if there's a test, so say for this one there was a two-part test, there's actually also in this question going to be a two-part test, and so that's where you're going to tell the client that that test exists, and then what happens when you apply that test to your case. And so then you'll have the closing, and basically telling them, thank you for asking the question, I hope this answers your question, and if you have any further questions, to contact you immediately. Now, the most important thing I want to point out is when you're restating the facts, there's a sentence here that I want you to include at the end of every fact paragraph of every letter you ever write. What this does, if there are any errors or omissions, please contact my office immediately so we can clarify any incorrect information. If for some reason your client has provided you information that's incorrect and your determination is based on those incorrect facts and they did not correct you, this is your opportunity to put the onus on them to correct any mistakes that might exist. And that way, if they come back to you later and say, but that's not what I told you, well, this is where you're covering that particular instance. Okay, so that's a very important sentence, and I want it in every client letter that you write for this term. So this is the authority that you're going to use for this week's memo and letter. So as far as when you're writing the authority in the memo, this would be sufficient information. So I would like to see it as something like, so if you were in your authority section, IRS, publication 17. That would be sufficient. Okay. So, and actually the way I found this was I went to irs.gov and I typed in the keyword or keywords CPA exam reimbursement. So you might go ahead and go to irs.gov and type that in yourself and see what you come up with, and that way you can see what this kind of looks like when you actually do a search. So this tax guide, if we go down, this is the cover. We see part 5. And as we go through part 5, we see standard deductions. That's not necessarily what we're looking for. Medical and dental expenses, taxes, interest expense, contributions, non-business casualty and theft losses, car expenses. Nope. Wait a minute. Here's 27, tax benefits for work-related education. Bingo. That's what we're looking for. So let's move